Probably will in about an hour. You need one? One for now and one for later. Okay, it's unless the tape comes loose, we'll go. No, not at all.
And I delivered.
Right. Good evening, everyone. Whoa. That's turned up loud. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 16th, 2015 meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. I am Julie Pierce, the chair of the Transportation Authority, and I would like to invite you all to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the first item on our agenda is public comment, and I have several, or at least a couple of speaker cards for public comment, and I have two here. And the first one is Andrew Weiss, to be followed by Greg Carr. Andrew? And Andrew will be followed by Greg Carr. And if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes, I think we're going to have a long meeting tonight. Okay, so we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. I'm a resident of San Ramon, and I'm here to discuss the Norris DAR ramp proposal. I am against this. In 2011, I found out about this project from a neighbor who told me that there had been a meeting presenting a draft AR proposal. I had never heard of this before. The residents of San Ramon do not want these ramps. We started a petition to protest this construction. We currently have about 1,300 signatures. In the past 30 days, over 200 people have signed this petition. There's an increasing awareness in San Ramon that these ramps are a bad idea. In addition, 2 city council members have already publicly declared that they're against the construction of these ramps. One more, and this project would be voted down by San Ramon. Further, we've already discussed this issue with legal counsel. The residents of San Ramon want what CCTA wants, the least amount of congestion and the smoothest flow of traffic on the 680 corridor. From my perspective, adding the DAR will only increase 680 congestion, especially considering that there are already 2 ramps, each less than a mile away. Projects that better control the flow of traffic or dedicated public transportation options seem to me to be a far better way to address all the stakeholders on the 680 corridor. I have 3 questions I would like answered. Is the Norris DAR a funded project on the new expenditure plan? Next, if not, how is this project to be funded? And finally, what would happen to the DAR if the San Ramon City Council rejects it? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker is Greg Carr.
Well, happy holidays. We got a lot of color here tonight. My name is Greg Carr, 29-year resident of San Ramon, a past elected official in that town. And I'm here tonight for 2 things to ask of all of you. First is, Ms. Pierce, you got an email from Jeff Rackmill, who is the chairman of a group called Coalition Against HOV Ramps in San Ramon. I ask that you ensure that that gets placed in tonight's public record. Secondly, I'm here to express my personal opposition to the HOV ramp on a very simple principle. Firstly, that ramp has no other purpose than to provide a mitigation to Sunset Development to allow them to show that they can mitigate traffic impacts on Crow Canyon and Bollinger Canyon Road off-ramps to allow them to build more office space. That's fine. If Mr. Marin wishes to have an off-ramp into his development so he can become a world-class location, all that, and have mitigations, then he should pay for it. The taxpayers of this county should not have to pay for a project that is probably going to grow to well over $200 billion just to primarily provide a benefit to a private company. That's feeding at the public trough, and where I come from, that's unacceptable. So here tonight, what I ask you, please, on this holiday season, is to do the right thing, including you, David, for the citizens of San Ramon and the taxpayers of this county. Find another project where those millions of dollars can be much better used for the people of this county, not for a private company. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. And yes, I did receive your email, as did most of the people in this room. And so, including some of the members of staff, I will make sure that is included in the public record for this evening. Thank you. I have no other comment cards. I'm sorry. Is there another public comment? Different agenda item. Okay. I have comment cards for item 3.1 and 3B7 already. So if you have comments on other items, get your comment cards into Denise and she will get them to me. So we will close the public comment period for items not on this evening's agenda and go on to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the November 18th meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or a motion?
So moved. Second.
Have a motion from, I believe it was Newell Arnrich, and a second from Romick. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain. That carries unanimously by those present. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Is there anything anyone wishes to pull for separate discussion? And this, just for the record, this does include items that would have been on the administrative committee agenda under consent, but we didn't have an administrative committee meeting this month, so this is the first time they have been seen. So
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
Motion by Tatson. Second by Hudson. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We are on to the major discussion items, the first of which is 3B7. And we do have one speaker card for this, and I'm going to go to it first as soon as we get the staff report. And the staff report will be given by Martin Engelman.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. Happy holidays. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and I'm here to present to you a status report on the 2016 Countywide Transportation Plan. The current schedule for the 2016 CTP involves releasing a draft Subsequent Environmental Impact Report, or DSEIR, and draft Countywide Transportation Plan, or CTP, in January of 2016, and considering the final SEIR and the project in May of 2016. This schedule was developed in part to include the analysis of a draft Transportation Expenditure Plan, or TEP, in the EIR. Tonight, staff wishes to alert the Authority Board to two recent developments that may affect this process and revisit the options for going forward. As you know, the last CTP was adopted in 2009. We generally update the plan every 4 to 5 years. Work began on the 2014 CTP update in 2012. Let me take a moment to recap where we've been with the 2014, now 2016 update of the CTP. In 2012, we began updating the action plans for routes of regional significance. In August of 2014, we released a draft 2014 CTP and subsequently released a draft SEIR in September. Then there was a 60-day public review period where we orchestrated and conducted a very extensive public outreach period. In March of 2015, the Authority was ready to adopt the CTP. However, at that time, the Authority decided to postpone that adoption and move forward with developing a TEP for the November 2016 ballot and to incorporate the TEP into the CTP. During spring and summer of 2015, staff and the consultant team worked on developing a revised draft CTP, including 3 transportation investment options to be evaluated in the SEIR. At its meeting last October, the Authority approved a revised outline for the 2016 CTP and a proposed approach for modeling the transportation investment options, which were financially constrained options. This effort was on track for release of the draft SEIR and the draft CTP in January, this coming January, with potential adoption in May of 2016. Now, 2 issues have arisen that could affect the CTP schedule. So staff is here tonight to inform the board about the 2 issues and to receive direction from you on how to proceed. So, issue 1. It relates to new legislation that affects the action plans for routes of regional significance, which are part of the CTP. You'll recall that Volume 2 of the 2014 draft CTP included the 5 action plans. They're developed by WCTAC, Transpac, Transplan, La Marinda, and TVTC, and you all worked very hard on those plans. The action plans identify a core network of freeways and major arterials, establish performance measures for that network, and then draw up a game plan for achieving the performance measures. One of the performance measures that we've been using in the action plans since early on in the Measure C program is level of service. I'm sure you're all familiar with level of service. It's a system of traffic measurement developed by the Transportation Research Board. It evaluates the ratio of traffic demand to roadway capacity. It generates a delay function, and then it assigns a grade level, A through F, similar to the grading system used in school, with A being the best, no delay, and F being the worst, long delays. The action plans also include a measure called delay index. On Highway 4, for example, the delay index is established at 2.5, meaning that it shouldn't take longer than 2.5 times as long to travel the corridor during rush hour as it would during the off-peak. That delay index easily translates into speed, a delay index of 2.5 on a freeway with a speed limit of 65 miles per hour computes to an average speed of 26 miles per hour, which sometimes would be considered a nice ride for someone going westbound on Highway 4 in the morning commute. The Measure J program created an intentional link between the action plans and environmental law, CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. The authority's implementation documents recommend that the action plan performance measures should be applicable in an EIR as a threshold of significance. That is, a criteria that would be used to decide whether the environmental impact of a project is significant or less than significant. The authority's use of the action plan performance measures as the EIR CEQA threshold of significance, it makes a lot of sense because local jurisdictions who wish to carry out specific projects will be able to evaluate an individual project's impact using the same measures, the same metrics that the authority uses in determining the CTP's broader impacts. In other words, it allows for an apples-to-apples comparison between the impacts of the overall CTP and the impacts of any individual future projects. It may also streamline environmental review for future implementing agencies by sparing them from having to perform a double analysis. The first analysis looking at how an individual project's impacts align with the EIR thresholds, and a second looking at individual project performance measures that are in the action plans that stem from Measure C, the Growth Management Program. So we've been following the recommended policy, and by golly, most, if not all, of the performance measures in the current action plans can now be used in an EIR as a threshold of significance. Enter SB 743. At present, CEQA guidelines allow use of level of service and delay as thresholds of significance in EIRs. However, the regulatory guidelines that are slated to be adopted under SB 743 will prohibit the use of level of service or delay as a threshold and instead require agencies to use vehicle miles traveled regardless of how much delay results. So in response to this issue, the question for the board is, should we go back out to the regional committees and ask them to revise their action plans to eliminate level of service and replace it with a new metric that the Office of Planning and Research is currently developing? And it's likely to be something having to do with vehicle miles traveled, though we're not sure exactly what it is yet. Or the RTPCs could keep level of service with the understanding that it may not be usable as a threshold for traffic impacts in future CEQA documents once the new SB 743 regulations have been issued. Then there's a second issue, and that involves analyzing the proposed draft TEP in the CTP draft SEIR. As proposed in our notice of preparation issued last July, analysis of a draft TEP was to be included as part of the EIR. And due to a number of challenging circumstances discussed last November, and which Ross will cover further on the next agenda item, release of the draft TEP is delayed, and this delay affects the schedule for completion of the CTP and the EIR. Two options to address the issues that I've summarized are as follows. One, continue with the current effort to complete the EIR and the CTP, which would also account for any potential effects of the associated action plans and TEP. And due to the delay in the completion of the draft TEP, this option would require a delay in the current schedule for the completion of the CEQA document and a corresponding delay in when the board may consider the EIR. Option two is to revise the CTP and associated action plans to implement this vehicle miles-based standard consistent with the forthcoming CEQA guidelines under SB 743, and decide whether or not to also retain a level of service standards in addition to VMT. Timing of the CEQA guidelines is uncertain, so as we wait, events may transpire that dictate further revisions to the CTP to reflect new information that comes up. This option, option 2, would not preclude the authority from continuing in its current effort to develop a TEP because the TEP has separate and independent utility. Our recommendation is option 2, allow the action plans to be amended in response to SB 743 and on a separate track continue forward with the TEP. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Before we get into discussion, I want to ask John Cunningham, who is the only speaker I have on this item, to come forward with his public comment, and then we will have what I hope will be a very brief discussion on this item. It seems pretty straightforward to me.
Hello, good evening. My name is John Cunningham. I'm a transportation planner with Contra Costa County. Regarding this item, I think Martin stole our thunder. A lot of our comments are going to be very similar to the description that Martin provided. I'm speaking in support of option 2. Right now, the county has been tracking the countywide transportation plan and the transportation expenditure plan quite closely. A tremendous amount of progress has been made. It's hard keeping up sometimes, frankly, with the review of documents, et cetera. Again, we're in support of option 2, which is to revise the CTP to implement VMT-based standards. That is particularly attractive to the county. We went on record on this in both our October 2014 letter, where we wanted CCTA to further integrate VMT into our guiding documents, action plans, the technical procedures, et cetera. And we also raised the issue in our November 2015 letter as well. It is, the reason for this is more efficient when local jurisdictions review the traffic impacts of development applications and general plan amendments with consistent metrics and guidelines. It's much more efficient. I think streamlined is the word that Martin used. I know this is probably particularly painful. CCTA staff worked very hard with the Growth Management Task Force years ago to bring the CEQA process and our local review process into sync, and now the latest actions from the state are bringing them right back out of sync, and here we are asking again to try and bring them back in sync. But however difficult or arduous this task might be, I think it's going to benefit the authority and it will benefit all member agencies when reviewing development applications if we can bring them under sync, as would be the case under option 2. That's all I had tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think from what I heard of the Planning Committee meeting, as well as what we have had discussed in various other venues since this letter came up and since we learned the impacts of SB 743, I know at least at our RTPC and Transpac, we had a brief discussion on this last Thursday, and it was our conclusion that we really need to get in sync with state law. It would be kind of silly to go through with a countywide plan that doesn't comply with state law. And while it allows us not to, because we were already in the process, that really doesn't seem smart, because we have projects all over the county that are coming forward that are going to be needing review and analysis, and if we don't have action plans that are in sync with the law, it would not behoove us. And so while it's an arduous process to do an action plan in the first place, it probably makes a whole lot more sense to wait. So I will take comments from the board, but hopefully it doesn't take a lot. Chris, you had your light on first, and then Romick, and then I think Don Tatson.
Yeah, thank you. I would certainly agree with staff and urge you to do both. Both my agency and other bus agencies around the state have some real problems with 743. It's great to look at vehicle miles traveled, but if you're trying to plan a bus route and you're trying to figure out what impact a particular project is going to have on a bus route, you need to have level of service as well.
Thank you, Chris. Kevin?
Very quickly, I support staff's recommendation of item number 2 and
suggest we move forward with that.
Don?
Assuming that was a motion, I'll second it. And I would just add, one of the things I like about option 2 is what it would bring is a compliance with state law, and then hopefully on an action plan by action plan basis, allow the authors of that action plan to decide whether or not to retain level of service standards.
That's correct.
Yes, and since it was not easy going through them the first time, I have a feeling it's not going to be any easier. It's probably going to be a lot more difficult this time. Newell, I have a motion and a second on the floor, so we are in discussion.
Yeah, just a quick question to staff. Level of service then by, because we're waiting for SB 743, this accommodates that. But is it the thinking that LOS goes away? And then how does that affect our draft EIR if it did go away?
So SB 743 specifically states that general plans and other documents can continue to retain level of service as a measure. It simply cannot be found to be a significant impact on the environment in an EIR. So if a local jurisdiction, and many of the local jurisdictions of you here tonight, have in your general plan growth management elements still level of service standards and refer to level of service standards from the action plans, they can be retained, and they can even be incorporated into an EIR. They just can't be found as something that would create a significant impact on the environment. That would be the new VMT metric would be used for that.
So going forward, let's say a community such as, there are several, have LOS, that as SP comes forward, we adopt and we move that direction, would in fact on annual compliance reports for return to source funding, would they be out of compliance because they're using LOS and we've moved to comply with SB 7? I mean, is there going to be a conflict, or do we know?
Well, that's a good question. To my knowledge, and just looking forward at this, I don't see any compliance issues either way, whichever way the jurisdiction goes. It's really more of a CEQA issue and how you do your EIRs and what you use for your thresholds.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Martin, let me ask you if it wouldn't be appropriate, given that we need to educate ourselves, number one, on all the ins and outs of 743, and the guidelines have not yet been written, but that there might be a couple of opportunities. One, at least a memo out to all of our planners, our community development directors, and our transportation folks to let them know that this is there so they can start looking at their own individual city guidelines and those kinds of things, as well as in preparation for when we get together and start redoing action plans, we can start thinking about what we might want to do. And then when we do get the guidelines, perhaps you can host a workshop for all of the planners to try to wrap their heads around how we actually get this done, because I don't think this sounds like something really easy to do, especially given some of the criteria and values that we have in some of our communities. So I would think that that would be a good educational opportunity to help our planners figure out what this really means.
Well, as a dyed-in-the-wool traffic engineer, I'd be delighted to do
I
all of
figured
this.
you would. I figured you would. All right. Any other comments? If not, I have a motion and a second for option 2. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And abstain? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. So we are on to, let me get my computer back to the agenda. 3.1 is the next item, and this is the transportation expenditure plan. And Ross, you are going to give that report.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners, and I'd like to wish you a happy holidays as well. Ross Chittenden, Chief Deputy Executive Director here with the Authority, and I will be covering this item today and participating in the discussion, as I'm sure we'll have some folks that want to talk when I'm done. So this item is really a continuation of a discussion that we started at the November meeting last month, and it's the results of the direction that you provided to staff to continue working on a potential transportation expenditure plan that could be considered as early as November 2016 ballot. And your direction included to continue to work with stakeholders to get the input and the recommendations that we had set as a goal that we would get before we start making decisions about what an expenditure plan would be. And specifically, we targeted 3 primary input sources. So we had the regional transportation plan, or not regional, the regional transportation planning committees, RTPCs, and they provided their input in August. So we've been sitting on that for quite a while, and a few of the RTPCs have been following some of the discussion. I know there's a few that may want to reconsider their recommendations. So what we're laying out here provides a little bit of time for that. That's really what we're talking about under this item, is taking a little bit more time. The second track was the public, so we've engaged in an extensive public input process. We've talked a little bit about that last month, and I want to thank the members of the public who took the time to participate in that and give us their input. And then the third track was the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee, the EPAC. And as we talked about in November, we asked for additional time to continue to work with the EPAC so that we could get a consensus-based recommendation out of that group. We think that's very important going forward, and I want to thank the board for that direction, that we continue to work with that group, because I think success in the measure, if we do go to the ballot, depends on that. So the recommendation outlined in the staff report is really twofold. The first part of it is members of the EPAC helped staff and our consulting team to really understand that the process that we had laid out working with them really wasn't as conducive environment for the types of discussions that we needed to have. We had this large group with a lot of different folks and widely diverse opinions. So trying to accomplish that in a large group setting was a little bit tough. So we're proposing that we kind of build on what's already happening out there. A number of members within the EPAC, both groups of like-minded individuals and individuals with diverse opinions, have been meeting on their own, continuing to have this dialogue. So that was great that they continue to do that, even through the little pause that we took here. So really what we're talking about is kind of building upon that and taking advantage of these smaller group settings to have be able to have these kinds of discussions with a lot of diverse opinions in a smaller, less formal setting. A lot of times, as you've all participated in things like that, that can be a little bit more productive, where you can put ideas out on the table and have a thoughtful and respectful discussion in a smaller group, try to reach consensus. So again, that's happening, and we're trying to build on that as we go forward. The kind of an overarching plan is laid out in a memo that's was appended to the agenda on Monday and emailed to you. I believe, Denise, we put that as a handout on the DS as well. So it's a good recommendation from the Gray, Bow, and Scott team. Bill Gray and Eric Zell are both here and can help answer questions as we walk through that. But the highlight is, again, we want to organize these smaller group discussions around, for lack of a better term, issue areas. Again, in the EPAC meetings, we often had a kind of an unwieldy agenda. So getting folks together and a little bit more focused, we think is very, will help us going forward. And what we want to do is to again, organize around these areas and then invite interested parties from the EPAC to participate. So it's a combination of trying to have an inclusive process so people can attend what they want to attend, but recognizing that not everybody wants to sit through all the discussions. So we don't want to put out any thoughts that this is trying to be more of an exclusive club. It's let people decide what they want to attend and participate in the discussions that they want to use their time for. So the memo lists a number of these issue areas, familiar topics. The growth management program, the urban limit line is always going to be on the top, but it's not the only thing that we'll talk about. accountability measures, moving towards how we can use this measure to enable more investment in complete streets is a topic. One that's actually had a lot of work, and we want to bring it back to the board, and mobility management, accessible services, a lot happening there. And then ultimately the actual funding categories that we would use in an expenditure plan. So it's a combination of trying to talk about how we will spend the funds that would come through a new sales tax, but also the framework and the policy environment that would be around that. So this is a partial list. The staff report has a more complete list. So again, we believe the small groups will work, and they can find areas of common ground. They can find areas where we may just have to agree to disagree, and then bring that back and allow the members that participate in those areas to really help educate and inform the EPAC. So it's not just a staff and consultant making presentations. It's getting the members of the groups to help inform and educate each other. We recognize that the change in process could be supported with a change in how we facilitate the group. So we're bringing in Ben Strumwasser with Circle Point. Circle Point works with the authority on many things, and they're part of the Gray Bow and Scott team, so that works well. And Ben has a lot of experience working in these kinds of environments. Just want a little update on that. I mentioned that individual EPAC members have been having meetings. Just today, myself and the consultant team have been invited into some of those meetings. So we had a good meeting today with members of, for lack of a better term, an environmental caucus, and Joel Delvincourt was part of that, and he's here tonight, and I think he's going to provide some comments on that. And then a separate meeting starting the discussion on growth management program and urban limit line. They're saying starting that discussion, because that, again, will be one that will be continuing for quite a while. A lot of good topics put on the table. We need to make sure that we take the time to listen in an open-minded manner, because we just need to think about how we do things, the things that we do well, and suggestions on how some of the things we do well could maybe be done a little bit better. So at any rate, want to just leave that on the table as well. So we're going to continue these meetings over the holidays. So a lot of folks are going to be around town, so that's good news, and we'll continue those discussions. We have our next EPAC meeting targeted mid-January. I don't have a date for that yet, but we want to make sure that we have enough productive meetings with the smaller groups before we call everybody back together. The second recommendation in my staff reports really relates to starting a more active dialogue here with the board. We run a tight time frame, and the original process we laid out was a little bit sequential, getting input, deliberate, go through a little bit of an iterative process, but overall it was relatively sequential. So we need to make sure that we keep things moving here at the board. Plus, I know a number of you are chomping at the bit to start talking about things and getting more engaged. So we want to do that. So we're suggesting that we have a number of informational workshops. I'll call them informational. I'm not sure workshop's the best word, but what we want it to be is a forum where we can present ideas, put them on the table, but not necessarily render our final outcome or decision. We really want to have it as a listening and feedback to help stakeholders who are involved in that discussion to understand where folks are, but not to necessarily get ahead of the process where we're making decisions before groups have had the chance to try to come together with a consensus. If we do get ahead of that, then we'd be feeding some thoughts by folks out there that we hear that we already know what we want, and we're just asking people to come along. So we'll have to make sure that we're in the listening mode with an open mind on those. To help with that, we may want to consider having Ben come in and facilitate that group, those kind of meetings. I would leave that to you, but that's a tool we could use. I know there's a number of topics where we have relative consensus, and those we may want to bring in, talk about them, and we kind of memorialize that. But there's other topics where I think we really want to have a more deliberative dialogue, in step with dialogue that stakeholders are conducting. And then once we get their input, you'll be informed or have a foundation that you can make final decisions when they come in with their recommendations. So, again, some of the topics that we might use for the workshop, most of them are really kind of overlap with the issue areas that are laid out in the Graybo and Scott memo. We haven't necessarily, well, to be clear about that, we're also want to make sure that we continue discussions at the regular authority meetings as well. So we're essentially talking about maybe doubling up with a regular meeting, having some discussions, and a special meeting if we can find some dates to do that. So staff hasn't yet identified specific dates. Potentially first Wednesday coinciding with PC. I did look at the calendar for most of the council meetings, and that seemed to be clear for many of you. I know you are also on a number of other bodies that I may not be aware of, and you may have some conflict there. But that's one potential date would be the PC meetings. March has a fifth week, so there's a fifth Wednesday in March. That could be another possible date. So we can work on that. But we do have a topic that we could discuss as early as January 6th if we had a consensus here that we'd want to schedule a special meeting for that date. And staff and consultants and members of the stakeholder community would be happy to come in on the 6th and start those dialogues. So I'll wrap that up for my presentation. Again, Eric and Bill are here if you had any specific questions about their recommendation. But I think it's a good plan, and it's got positive feedback from the folks that have reviewed it and sat down with us to discuss it. So we recommend that we take the time to continue getting that input over the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you very much. I am going to call for public comment in just a minute before we have our discussion, so we have the benefit of our public comment. But I wanted to make two statements first. And just to be clear for everyone, both here and in our listening audience, and we do have a listening audience who is paying very close attention to what we are talking about. There was apparently some misunderstandings of our audio at the last meeting, and so I want to make it really, really clear that we are still in the process of developing our draft transportation expenditure plan. And while we have had discussions with various stakeholders, such as BART, regarding what they would like to see in the TEP, just as we've had discussions with the cities and with the EPAC and with all of the various stakeholders, we have made absolutely no commitment to fund BART cars, especially, in exchange for items that may interest the authority. We are still working with all of our stakeholders to produce the draft transportation expenditure plan. Those decisions will not be made until we have heard much more in this process. So I want it clearly understood we have not made any of those decisions, and nor was any of the discussion at our last meeting intended to suggest anything else. All right. So, and the other item is, I did have a discussion this afternoon with some of our consultant staff on this idea of a workshop, perhaps as early as the January 6th meeting, right after the planning committee meeting. So the planning committee would meet at 6. Half of us are already here for that, so that should take care of at least half of the authority members, and then suggest that we would meet then at 7 or immediately following the planning committee meeting. We could even schedule it potentially for as early as 6:30, and we'd hang out in the other room until they were done, just to make sure that we could proceed as expeditiously as possible. But for the public, I would suggest probably 7 is safer to agendize. So think about that, and we can have a little bit more of that discussion after we hear from public comment. So I now have 4 speaker cards for public comment on this item. I have first Kenji Yamada, then Dave Campbell, then Debbie Toth, then Joel Devilcourt. So Kenji and then Dave Campbell, be ready right after him. Come on up, Kenji.
Chair Pierce, members of the Authority Board, members of staff, thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Kenji Yamada. I'm here on behalf of Bike Concord. First, I want to commend staff on their tenacity and patience in significantly reinventing the transportation expenditure plan process while continuing to pursue a strong consensus among many interest groups. I'd like to underline the importance of robust Complete Streets funding in the TEP by telling you about a future project where a lot of that funding is needed. Monument Boulevard in Concord is one of the main thoroughfares of our city. It's a conduit for tens of thousands of cars a day, often at speeds in excess of 40 miles an hour, carries heavy trucks, other delivery vehicles. It's lined with both large and small businesses and quite a few apartment complexes. The Iron Horse Trail crosses it, and it's a community street full of working people and families riding bicycles, walking, pushing strollers, getting on the bus, and using wheelchairs. Most of these residents are driven by financial necessity to use transportation modes other than private cars. As any of them will tell you, the experience on Monument for anyone not in a motor vehicle is unpleasant and dangerous. Monument is in serious need of a complete street redesign for quality of life, health, and basic physical safety. Community organizations back that vision. Monument residents have been expressing a desire for such a project for years, most clearly in the City of Concord's Monument Urban Design Study in 2008, 7 years ago. As yet, that demand is unmet, and the street continues to be dangerous for its residents. It will continue to be so until a project to solve the problem can be funded. According to Concord Transportation staff, such a project will take about $8 million. This is one example of a large complete street project needed to address serious safety deficits. There are many others throughout our county. Measure J reauthorization with a large allocation for complete streets in the TEP is the best opportunity to address them. Please do not miss this opportunity. Civically active residents who want these safety issues solved, about a dozen of whom you heard from in this room on October 21st, from Bike Concord, Bike Walnut Creek, and other groups, are eager to provide the on-the-ground volunteer outreach that will help get Measure J reauthorization passed in November. Their effort will have to be earned with a TEP that sets up solutions to current safety deficits for non-motor users of our streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenji. The next speaker is Dave Campbell, followed by Debbie Toth.
My name is Dave Campbell. I'm the Advocacy Director with Bike East Bay, formerly East Bay Bicycle Coalition. I want to thank the board for the support shown at the November meeting to move forward and try to come together consensus on a plan to get us much needed money for transportation improvements in Contra Costa County. Thank you for that. I want to talk about the Complete Streets component of the community vision for a better Measure J and a better transportation sales tax. You're going to be getting more information on this community vision from many groups who are working together with staff and other stakeholders to come up with a good plan. I want to start off by thanking the cities of Pleasant Hill and Walnut Creek and the CCTA. We cut the ribbon on the Geary Street Complete Street a few weeks ago. And several speakers talked about the complete street that we have on Geary Street now, Geary Boulevard. And it's much better now. You can bike on the street much better. It's actually a lot better for walking now. There's street lights on there as well. And if you're driving it, you have a left turn pocket. So if you're turning left, it's much better. If you're going straight, it's much better because the person going left now has their own pocket. Now I'm going to ask you to just imagine for a moment regular bus service going up and down Geary Boulevard, maybe every 15 minutes, which is our goal in the county. Then we truly have a complete street so that the people living in the community there have options to get to BART and to get around. So imagine that bus service there. Then we've got a complete street, and you have an idea of the type of project that Bike East Bay is pushing for as a complete street project in a new Measure J. And in some, you may be thinking, and some cities may think, oh, we do this for all our projects. We already do complete streets. We don't need a separate program. We don't need to call it out. But I'll submit to you, when you're doing complete streets, one, when you see the numbers of people walking and biking go up, you see the numbers of people taking public transportation go up, and probably most important for a lot of you is you're going to start getting phone calls from your constituents saying, it's actually easier for me to drive now, too. How many of you get those phone calls today? With more complete streets, you're going to be getting a lot more of those phone calls, and that's why complete streets is so important to us and why I think it's going to make this measure successful in November next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And the next speaker is Debbie Toth, followed by Joel Devilcourt. Hi, Debbie.
Good evening, Chair Pierce. Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. Thank you, board members, for the opportunity and staff to speak tonight. First and foremost, Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, and Happy Holidays in case I missed any. I am here tonight as a member of the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee, as a member of the Paratransit Coordinating Council, as the CEO of Rehabilitation Services of Northern California, and as an advocate for appropriate, accessible transportation for everyone. I wanted to first and foremost thank the board because the process in this round is so very different than it was in 2002, 3, 4, leading up to the passage of Measure J. Just for those who don't know me, I run a nonprofit agency with 80 staff. We have a budget of $3.5 million a year. We provide a tiny, tiny little transportation program, and that is taking people to and from our adult day healthcare program in Pleasant Hill and providing homebound, low-income Concord seniors with a way to get to groceries and medications. That program is less than 2.5% of my overall agency budget, and I spend more than 20% of my time advocating for better transportation. And that's not right. It shouldn't be those of us who are trying to run nonprofits that are out here trying to improve the transportation system. And I think that I'm seeing it happen in front of my eyes, and I can't even tell you how elated I am about the process. To hear Ross say mobility management, I almost kissed him, and I'm sick, so I didn't.
Please don't.
It's just, it's a different day, and I'm really excited with the movement and the recommendations from the Board of Supervisors. I strongly support their recommendations, as well as just to let you know there's this really organic community process that's happening around mobility management with the plan that was initially funded by MTC through County Connection and the continuation of that work with Mobility Matters and the convening of all the paratransit providers in Contra Costa. And we are making progress, and I just so appreciate the support, and I look forward to a new and improved EPAC in the process. So thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And the last speaker card that I have is for Joel Devilcourt. Welcome, Joel.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Joel Devilcourt with Greenbelt Alliance, and also in representation of a wide group of coalition members that are both a part of the EPAC, as well as people who throughout the region the county, local, excited about a transformational future for Contra Costa. So I'm very happy to be here and very thankful for your continued support of that vision. It was great to hear in November that we're all getting it, and we're getting it together. It may be slow, it may be fits and starts, but it's exciting to be a part of this process with you. We strongly recommend the staff report. Early opportunities to have small stakeholder meetings have proven exceedingly fruitful at finding common ground. As Ross had noted, there were some early meetings between folks that may appear at face value to have opposite viewpoints, and I've actually found a lot of opportunities for growth together and ways of achieving the right kind of future for Contra Costa. So we recommend that go forward as well. We shared with you a community vision document, and we are currently working on a transformative policy document that is accompanying that. The point of that is to really connect ways to improve quality of life, reducing congestion, and opportunities to invest in our communities. And it spans across issue areas. Greenbelt Alliance is not here just to talk about growth management, and we're not here just to talk about one thing or another. We've really found a common voice, and we really look forward to leadership here on the board to make that happen, and we're very excited that you all are very committed to making that happen in 2016. The last piece I'll say is that we need to work together. So as well as stakeholder meetings, I'm looking forward to working with you all and working with you in your capacity to move forward something that's wonderful for Contra Costa. So thank you all very much. Happy holidays, and see you all soon.
Thank you, Joel. I think several people just made the case that we ought to have a workshop on the 6th of January so that we can kick that process off and we can start hearing from folks. So, Karen, I saw your light first, and then Dawn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I support this proposal, and I would support the January 6th meeting. One thought I had, although I get both what you said also, was if the planning committee was able to meet more around 5 or 5:30. I know Mr. Durant just janged his head up because that may not work. It was just a thought because we're usually finished with our meeting in about an hour. But I heard the chair mention that it may be easier for the public to get here at 7. So, I could go either way. I would prefer the earlier because if we are going to do 7, then I would like us to have real structured agendas so that we're out of here by 9. If we say we're out of here by 9, then we're hopefully out of here around 9:30. And as we get, it's how it goes. As we get more into the discussions, that may not be possible. But I think, especially in a workshop format, I have found in other environments, if it's structured, it really leads the discussion and you don't get off topic as much as we like those topics. And maybe with the schedule coming out, future meetings can show what future topics will be so that people know that, well, if it isn't tonight, I don't maybe need to talk about it under public comment because it will be coming up the next time we meet. And so I actually like the idea of the first, third, and fifth Wednesdays. And I know what you said there wasn't a fifth Wednesday until April. Or is it March? But that's okay. If we did that. And those were my thoughts. Thank you.
All the more reason for a facilitated discussion. All right. Dawn and then Newell.
Duacle had his light on first.
Dawn, you're so nice. I just want to, first of all, I'm really excited. I'm really pleased to hear from our community partners. I've heard not only those from tonight, but over the past 10 days I've been contacted by several people who had real skepticism as we were moving forward. Things weren't going quite the way we want. But the common message, the message I hear tonight, is that everybody really wants to do this. So we actually have a lot more in common than I think we might have thought we had, that we do want to accomplish this. And that's a great opportunity. I think we ought to call the workshops study sessions. Study sessions are those that you don't make decisions. We as council members know what those mean. And yes, facilitate them with an agenda. They should be informative, but a study session doesn't allow the board to express their opinion, and it can be, immersed into future decisions and things like that without taking a vote. And I think that's important so that the input that we're getting from the people that are contacting us, we can help express that and make sure that all those voices are heard. I think everything that Ross has proposed, I think, is the right course. I'm encouraged by our sort of retooling and how the EPAC will work. I'm available anytime. This is really important. And whatever time it takes, we need to do it. If it's going to happen, it's going to take a lot of work on all of our part, and particularly staff, without question. I think there are some things that are worth discussing. That it seemed that we had some ideas that we were going to completely come up with a whole new theory and a management. CTA is going to be reborn. There are things that the voters asked us to do in both Measure J and Measure C. And Measure J, we went a long ways to reinforce the urban limit line. That's a long-term vision. And you know what? It's worked. Nobody has violated it. Nobody's crossed that line. It was done and is there for a purpose, which is to support smart growth and transit-oriented development. Without that, you bleed out into the suburbs. So this is really the best tool we have. I would hope that as we go forward, that what we get excited about and share our passion is for what are priorities for projects and new programs. And that should be, anything should be on the table. But I hope that our core value, who we are, because otherwise we're going to have two agencies. And to do that is they're going to be cross-conflicting each other. So I hope as we go forward, we're focused on what are the new methodologies that we can do to move goods and services, what are the safety measures we could put in, what are the things that we can make public transportation integrate better with all the things that we're doing, and also leave a good amount of room, and this is hard, a good amount of room of things that we don't know because they haven't been invented, because this is another 25 years. We will not have, unless some magic legislation comes along, we won't have another period of time in 25 years to do another one of these. This will end this for us. So we ought to think about it, call it a, like most of us have budget reserves, a reserve for the unknown future enhancements that will do that. We have not done that in the past. Who would have thought, here we are barely 5 years later, and we're talking about cars. Ford today just announced they just got their test model going. They're testing their first car. Google says they want a car on the street that we can buy with their system in it in, 42 months. That's going to happen, so we need to be able to do that. But I hope that we do focus on the exciting ideas, the exciting opportunities, but I hope we try not to re-argue our past, because that past is our future, and we made a commitment to the voters. So on one hand, we have that commitment. It is working. The new, quote, development theories that we're doing are all still within that framework we all knew were coming forward. And so I think we really have a great opportunity. I would also just like to mention, just for disclosure, East Bay Regional Park is probably contacting all of our RTCPs. They contacted me as the representative for the cities. They're advocating to have monies in this measure to connect their trails, since they are in both our counties, but here in Contra Costa, they connect a lot of our communities together, both for pedestrian, bike, and other means of transportation. And, so I know we're going to hear their voice. I gave them a recommendation. They wanted a percentage. And I say this to everybody, don't come here and ask for a percentage. Put some specific ideas down. How much does it cost? And where's your matching funding? And let's see what we can do to put together the best expenditure plan that takes all the resources, and everybody needs to put their nickel in there, because enough nickels makes a dollar, and we can do a project.
Thank you, Newell. Those are the kinds of ideas that are going to come out, I think, during the workshop, and that's what that's intended for. So we won't be giving too many more opinions here tonight. Don?
Well, I wanted to thank staff and the various small groups that have been meeting over the past month for the work they've done, both in terms of advancing some of the small group topics as well as rethinking our approach, and I'm in support of what's here. I noticed on page 3 of the Graybo-Scott memo that there's a list of topics, and I think those are all great topics for us to discuss. At least in our RTPC, the one we've discussed is the expenditure plan, and we just haven't gotten to the others. And so what I would encourage is that as the small groups talk about those, and then we meet in our extra meetings or study sessions, whatever we choose to call them, and essentially we walk those paths together. As Ross said, we don't want to be in a position where it comes across that the authority has made certain decisions about those items and we're just telling the folks to come along, nor do we want it to come across as the small groups have made the decisions and they're telling us to come along. We need to go through this process and learn from each other. And so I would support having the additional meetings and doing that. And as somebody pointed out to me earlier this evening, I'm retired, so I can come whenever I'm needed.
It's all about allocating our resources and our priorities. So, Bob?
Yes, just some clarification on the calendar. A lot of us have a lot of meetings, and I'm no different than any of us. So if we could somehow or another down the road get some type of calendar versus, we're going to have a meeting in a week from now.
I'm suggesting that we reserve the first and the third Wednesdays. We already have the third reserved for meetings of the full authority for regular authority business, to which we can add this as a standing agenda item. I am suggesting that we have a special meeting on the first Wednesday after the planning committee meeting, because half of us will already be here, and we have that be focused entirely on the expenditure plan work that we are doing, and that will be facilitated workshops and study sessions, or however we want to term it, but collaborating with many of our stakeholders to hear directly from them what are some of their ideas and things that are important to them. It's time to start some of that more formal listening for us. And so that's the suggestion. If we need a fifth Wednesday, which would be back-to-back with a first Wednesday, we might be able to use that too, but we'll know that better when we get to March. Let's start with January and February at least, but for right now, for the next several months, just block off those days. Okay? Okay, so any other discussion, or do I have a motion for the calendar?
I'll move that item.
Wow. Okay, I have a motion by Tats and a second by Mitchoff to add a standing meeting on the first Wednesday. Is that what I heard? Yes. And so that will be following
To begin at 6:30, and then understanding that the planning, it will go, or just immediately after. Mala may have better language for us. Or did you want to set it specifically at 7?
You know, these meetings are at 6 and we get people here. So let's say 6:30 or immediately following the planning committee meeting. And if people get here early and we have quorum issues, we can stack them in the conference room, or they can go in the kitchen and hang out, something like that. But I don't want people sitting around for half an hour waiting for the hour to change so that we can start a meeting. So we'll say we're going to start at 6:30 and we'll be expeditious. Further discussion, Mr. Durant?
Yeah, on the timing issue, I think, there's a couple of aspects of it, but I think the chair of the planning committee, working with staff, is going to have to sort of manage the calendar. It is not necessary. It's difficult for me to get here even by 6, just because of the nature of my job. But I also think we want to be careful not to do a disservice to the public by scheduling the planning committee meetings at times before the public can get here. For people who work in San Francisco, they may want to attend our meetings and things. So I think there's a balance to be struck, and I have a comfort level that will strike the balance, but I don't want to lock that in now, because there may be things that come up on the planning committee's agenda over the course of the next few months that actually are equally important and require enough time to deliberate. So what I would recommend is, rather than locking in 6:30 as a definitive every time, that we simply say that we will aim for 6:30, subject to what is on the planning committee agenda, and as you said, or as soon after 6:30 as we can start. But obviously
We would
that
post
doesn't
it for
shortchange
6:30.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
We would post it for 6:30 or immediately following, whichever is sooner, and whichever is later. And that works for the posting standard, and I think because this item won't be on the planning committee agenda, because it will be on the committee of the whole agenda, that should help to abbreviate the planning committee agendas just a little bit. So, Newell.
I was just going to say, you had asked to do both Wednesdays. Why don't we put the first and third Wednesday, that we have this meeting always at 6, schedule a study session for 7, tentatively in both February on the same day, because if this isn't on our agenda, our meetings are done in an hour. This is the only thing of the past 6 months to tell us up. We're going to need those meetings, and then that way we have it. Staff knows it. We're all ready. So we'll have a regular meeting on our third Wednesday of the month, starting at 6, and schedule, and we can cancel it, a 7 p.m. study session if needed. But
Meeting of the whole.
Yeah, meeting with the whole. That way we're done. We stop the regular meeting, go into a study session.
I would like to suggest that we make the committee of the whole transportation expenditure plan discussion there again be posted for 6:30 or immediately following the full authority meeting. That way we don't wind up done with our business at 6:45 and have to wait I think that's really important.
Because we don't have anything, in those first 2 months, if you look at our normal agendas, no budget. Other than this, it's stuff we've done in committee, so thank you. So that was okay for both the motions.
The maker and the seconder are okay?
That's fine. What I would say is on the regular meeting nights, while I would suggest we go to that topic, that we allow ourselves the flexibility of making decisions, because we may need to make decisions
Or at least
periodically.
give direction on future
Right.
meetings.
Exactly. So, whereas on the first Wednesday of the month, is really is more of a listening, asking questions process.
Okay. And Mala can work with us on how to write those so that they're carefully done. Yes, sorry,
Yeah,
Dave.
No problem. I'd just like to point out that the benefit of having the committee as a whole meet after planning is you're pretty darn sure that you're going to have 5 people here
That's my
for
point.
planning because the alternate's going to be here.
Yeah.
And you can't beat that. I mean, this will work out. We just need to make sure that we're back on the time schedule that we're going to need if, in fact, we can come to an agreement.
Yeah. Well, I think this will get us to that agreement, and the public will have the opportunity twice a month to come and talk with us. So if they can't make it to one meeting, they should be able to make it to another. And since no decisions are going to be made until further down the line, that gives them all an opportunity. Janet?
Yeah, the comment that I'd like to make is, as the current chair of the planning committee, is we aren't normally ever done by 6:30, except on rare occasions. So if we made it about 6:45, would be more realistic, and then we wouldn't be asking members of the public to come in and sort of cool their heels.
I understand what you're saying, but usually the planning committee has had the expenditure plan or the countywide plan on their agenda. If that's taken off the agenda, it shortens your meeting quite a bit.
I don't think so.
Anyway, let's try it and see, so that we don't have people waiting. Yeah. Okay, so
It is frustrating. I know when I've been a member of the public and I've had to go to meetings and just sit there and wait. I just was thinking that if we did it 6:45, that would be a compromise. Thank you.
the maker and the seconder?
That's such a tough time. Either make meetings at 6:30.
Let's try 6:30 in January. There probably isn't, I'm not sure there's much going to be coming up in the next 2 weeks for that first planning committee meeting agenda, so then we'll see what happens.
Okay. All right. David?
Yeah, just a question. In terms of what we're expecting to look at the meeting on did you want to say something? Sorry,
I was exactly going to suggest that. I know I'm not supposed to talk when I get a yes, but I think for the folks listening in, it'd be good to talk a little bit about what I would propose for the agenda for the first meeting.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I think there's really two main things we'd want to talk about. Joel mentioned the community vision document, and he brought that in October, and we'll send that out again just to follow up from today's meeting. And he also mentioned that we're working on, or his group is working to develop a policy framework. So he and I have chatted, and we'd be happy to bring that in. And that does a couple of things. It puts some things on the table. But I think it also, that we could discuss at that meeting, but I think it also really helps us to identify the items and the sequence of items that we'd want to talk about in the future meetings. And staff could bring in some suggestions with the schedule. There are a lot of efforts underway, that really collaborative efforts that I think we know we could agendize whenever we want. Again, mobility management, accessible services, and she's not there. And then regional advanced mitigation programs. Those are a couple of things that staff has been involved in, you've been involved in, and I think those are ready for discussion. So we could identify specific dates for those. But then I think after we walk through the policy framework, community vision policy framework, I'd suggest we conclude the meeting with taking those items and try to calendar them for the next couple of meetings. So it's a combination of getting into some meat and then think about when we're going to be prepared to really dig in on a few items.
Okay, thank you, Ross. So we have a motion by Tatson and a second by Mitchoff. I think that was the order. to meet on the 6th of January at 6:30 or immediately following the planning committee, whichever is later. And there's.
The motion also assumed a meeting on the first Wednesday.
Yes. And for everyone to hold their calendars for the first and third Wednesdays for this topic as a committee of the whole.
Madam Chair, Randy's identifying an interesting question to the side here, which is on nights when the planning committee is canceled, should we just assume that we're still starting at 6:30?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And okay, that works. Okay, everyone understands the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain. That carries unanimously. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Ross. You guys have got your work cut out for you over the holidays.
Nice job.
Thanks to you and the consultants and to all of our stakeholders. We are proceeding in an orderly manner, but it will be expedited, so we will be working hard. We are on now to our regular agenda items. Because the Admin and Projects Committee meeting on December 3rd was canceled, we do have item 4A8, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and Management Letter for fiscal year 2015. And Randy, you are going to handle this expeditiously.
Good evening, Chair Pierce, members of the Authority Board. My name is Randy Carlton. I'm the CFO for the Authority. The gentleman to my right is Brian Kelleher, the Finance Manager. You should find before you a document like this. This is our bound version of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Statement. We refer to it as the CAFR. Terminology you probably have heard in your local jurisdictions, because this is the document format for which public agencies communicate their financial results for a fiscal year. We finished our audit. We've prepared the financial information that's contained in here. It's about 80 pages worth of content. What we want to do tonight in an expeditious fashion is to give you the highlights of what's in this document. We're happy to turn to any particular page that may be of interest to the board, but we thought we would just focus on the sources of revenue, how they're performing, how we've been spending the funds, and how we finish the year. Brian will handle that part of the presentation. When he is done, I'll ask David Bullock, the partner in charge for the audit from Macias Gini O'Connell, to come forward, and he will give a high-level overview of the management letter to the board, discuss a couple of status items on GASB pronouncements, and address, of course, any of your questions that you have of him. So that's the table we've set before you. Probably take 10 minutes tops. Okay, all right, and I'll turn it over to Brian.
And before you start, just let the record show that Commissioner Durant is going to be leaving in order to catch a flight for his wonderful vacation, and he will be replaced at the DS by Councilmember Ron Leon from Concord. Thank you.
You are welcome to take the CAFR with you.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you all are invited to keep this bound colored version. You have a black and white PDF in your packet. If you do not wish to take it, we're not offended, but we will put it back into our stock so that perhaps we can not have to print more later on when we run out of a supply. So if you don't want to take it with you, just leave it there.
The schedule in front of you is the statement of net position. This is the one of the two most important pieces in the CAFR. This one will tell you the fiscal health of the organization. But what sets us aside from a lot of the cities and other municipalities, when you go right down to the bottom, you see the negative numbers. And the negative numbers are a result of the bonds that we issue. And we all know that we issue the bonds to build the infrastructure for all the cities and send it off. So that will be the reason for the negatives down there. But if we look at the assets up top, we have our cash and investments, and you compare year to year, they remain relatively the same. When you look at the restricted cash and investments, you can see that it's decreased about $79 million. And the reason for that decrease is that we're spending the Measure J bond funds to build the infrastructure. Another important piece in there that looks new is the deferred outflows of resources. You can see GASB came out with a new pronouncement that everybody's going to start putting their pension plans on the books and say, what's your unfunded portion? And many of you remember back in May, we came in and we elected to pay off our unfunded balance. But as part of the GASB pronouncement and working with CalPERS, all of these numbers in there are reported as of fiscal year ending 2014, the year before. So you show the deferred outflows, and then you see some deferred inflows, which reflect payments made during the fiscal year. So at the end of 2014, we had about $2.1 million. That's the payment we made, so we should have a zero balance unless things change. And as we look at our long-term debt, there's about a $12 million reduction. That's the principal payment in the bonds there. So I will move ahead. And as we look at the statement of activities, this is going to be all your revenues less your expenditures by the individual programs. You can see there that we have the slight increase in the sales tax that we talked about during the fiscal year. You can see that our capital grants are slightly down than the year before. A lot of that is due to the timing of the grants and the applications that we have. We try and go out and use our RM2 money, our BATA money, and all our other grants, and then use Measure J. Once again, that's why we saw the increase in the bond proceeds go up to $79 million this year, is because we're starting to use all of those proceeds there. As we look down at the individual programs there, our administrative salaries and benefits stayed at about $600,000, which is about 0.8%, which is well below our 1% cap. You look down at project management, that seems to be relatively small. Our programs is our return to source funds for the street maintenance as well as programs for buses. You can look at the transportation projects. You can see that year over year, the prior year we had some Caldecott and some SR4 things, construction projects. This year the new projects are the SR4 160 interchange. They're relatively about the same year over year, which I found to be interesting. And so you go down to the bottom, total expenses remain relatively about the same. The change in accounting principle, which is about the third line from the bottom, that's just your restatement from the prior year for the pension piece in there. In one of the other sections that's in the CAFR is the notes section. There's about 14 notes in there, and it basically, as you know, through all of your CAFRs, it goes through and spells out the policies and sorry about that. So we have the notes section, and one of the important things is in note 1 is the new pronouncement for GASB 68 that talks about the implementation of the pension liability. Note 3 is our cash and investments. That one will show where all our investments are, shows the length of the investments that we have. Note 7 is long-term debt. It shows that we have about $366 million in outstanding debt. That's prior to the issuance we just closed for the 2015 bonds. That'll add about another $85 million on that. The swap agreement shows it was a negative $43.7 million. And then notes 8 and 9 is the pension plans, and that goes through and it explains what the pension and OPEB benefits are for the employees and shows what our liabilities are there as well. Note 12 will do our net position and fund balances. And perfect. And then we have the statistical section, and that goes into all the different trends for the authority. We have the financial trends, and it's really interesting to look back at the last 10 years. all the addition in transportation projects that we've been building, looking at all the different revenue sources that are coming in and where we are today. The debt capacity is obviously increasing as we receive more sales tax numbers. Just today, I looked at the sales tax numbers for this year. I know that doesn't pertain to the CAFR here, but we're up well above 5% so far this year, so we should have another good year there. There's also economic and demographic information in there. That's county-wide. And then we also added a couple new pieces in the operating information that shows how many checks we issue a year, how many invoices we're processing, and you can see that we've kind of increased over the last 4 to 5 years worth of data that I was able to find. So with that, I conclude that portion.
Thank you, Brian. Unless there's any questions from the board on that part, we can move on to the management letter. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, question by Newell and then Don.
Yeah, since it came through APC, note 8 under pensions and under our, I just want to go through that for a second. We had made a prepayment, and in that prepayment, we knew we had about $600,000, kind of a round number of a cushion in that we were looking forward what we anticipate. And the way I read it, and I don't want to say it out loud, how do you read what you wrote based on what we paid? Are you saying that we owe an additional amount? And has that restatement and recalculation changed what we thought when it came through APC back when we approved to do the prepayment?
No, we should be fully funded, if not a bit super funded or overfunded on our pensions. For when we do this CAFR report next year, it should be, we will be potentially zero balance or potentially a little, depending on our returns on investments and demographic.
Because the way it reads, it doesn't exactly read just what you said. And I read a lot of these reports. I run a company. This was challenging to read that. So I'm glad to hear that. I just want to make sure David agrees with you when he gets up here. So great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And that was good forward thinking. Thanks.
Thanks, Newell. Don?
One, I just wanted to thank all of you for really an excellent report. As I said last year, this really lays out the authority's finances in a very clear way that someone with a reasonable amount of financial knowledge can read and understand. I think separate from this, I want to talk to you about the statement of net position. I understand exactly why it looks the way it does. I have somewhat of a concern that if we were to have a sales tax election and we have a negative campaign, that the deficit could be misconstrued. So I'll just contact you offline to see if there are some essentially options we might have for how to explain that. I don't need a response now.
There was one thing I wanted to mention during the presentation that you just reminded me. As we look at the negative net position there, I did have a note that over the years since Measure C and Measure J, we've put together about $1.3 billion in transportation, physical assets, infrastructure, not just projects and programs.
And that's sort of the kind of thing I want to talk about.
We just don't get to put them on our balance sheet.
I understand.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
We should have negative numbers, really what we ought to be saying.
Right. Yes, go ahead.
At this time, I'd like to invite David Bullock up, where he'll give an overview of the management letter.
Welcome, David.
Good evening. Madam Chair, Commissioners, David Bullock, nice to meet you. Nice to be here. I did hear the word, expeditious, so brevity will be my middle name. Quickly, just to respond to Newell's comment on a follow-up. So the presentation of the net pension liability is in arrears. It's a year behind. You're reporting, and that's just as quick as CalPERS can provide the information, and it's allowed for by GASB to do that, anticipating that the pension plans wouldn't be able to give you information timely enough for your year end. So the number that's reflected as a liability was $2.2 million as of June 30th, 2014. You made a contribution, a prepayment, if you will, of $2+ million. It's in the footnote. So, but things will change. When you get to 2015, you're going to have the actuary re-estimating the net or the total pension liability, and the returns on the investments are probably not going to be as good at the year end 2015 as they were in 2014. So, barring any changes in the pension plan, the $2.2 million is a straight contribution towards that deficit. So, as of right now, it looks like you've just fully funded your plan by plugging in an additional $2.2 million into it. But
plus, you get the investment on advancing that $2.2 million, so it actually performs better. So, okay,
right.
Thank you.
And yes. So just to follow up on that, the management letter that was referred to is our way of kind of communicating the results of the audit. There was no findings that were reported in the management letter. It was a very clean audit, so I should take a step back. Brian just went through a lot of the details of the finances, so I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted to let you know that our opinion that accompanies the audit was an unmodified opinion. So that's a clean opinion. It was a clean audit. There were no material misstatements in the financial statements. The letter that we attach here kind of summarizes some of the key aspects. Anytime there's a change from one year to the next, we want to make sure you're aware of it. And obviously, the big change for the authority was the implementation of GASB 68. Although, if you look at the numbers, you may not feel it was a big implementation. Looking and reflecting at your own organizations, you may have a much more significant impact, financial impact. But for the authority, there's a lot more disclosure. There is assigned a proportionate share of that pension pool. That's never been done in the past. You've just made your contributions and you're part of a pool, but there's never been a number assigned to you. So that's really a new idea that came out of GASB 68. So that's a significant change. The other thing I wanted to make sure you're aware of, and you may have heard this from your own organizations, is that GASB is continually issuing new standards, and there's going to be a new standard required to be implemented here in the next few years that deals with OPEB. And, again, for this organization, I mean, if you look back in the financial statements, we disclosed about an $803,000 unfunded liability as of the latest actuarial evaluation date of 2013. So not an extremely large number, but another implementation coming up in the near future. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have of me.
Any questions of David? Very well said. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Randy?
Yeah, I think we beat our 10-minute estimate by maybe half a minute. With that, no other questions. Staff recommendation is that the authority board accept the financial audit for fiscal year 2015.
Second.
Okay, motion by Taylor, second by Tatson. Any further discussion? Yes, Chris?
I just think your staff deserves, and you deserve, an enormous amount of credit for having the cleanest financials of any public entity I've ever dealt with. The idea that you've managed to pre-fund your deficits in your retirement, that your OPEB is pretty much not a problem, that is not the case in most other government entities I know of, and I think you really deserve credit for that.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate that. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain. That carries unanimously. Thank you all. We are going on to item 4B6, which came up under the Planning Committee. This is a public hearing for the adoption of the proposed 2015 Congestion Management Program update for Contra Costa. And we have a report from Matt Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, board members, and happy holidays.
Just to move this along a little, if there are any public speakers on this item, would you fill out a speaker card, please, and get them to Denise? And we will take public comment after Matt's presentation. Thank you. Sorry about that, Matt.
That's okay. Thank you. As the Congestion Management Agency for Contra Costa County, we are required by state legislation to update the Congestion Management Program every 2 years. The 2015 CMP is our 12th, and it has 5 required components according to the legislation. We must establish level of service standards for countywide roadway network that includes all highways and principal arterials. I'll circle back to that level of service as it was discussed earlier and has some bearing here. We are also required to establish performance measures to evaluate the current and future multimodal performance of the transportation system for the movement of people and goods. A capital improvement program that identifies projects that are seeking funding to improve the performance of the system. We must have a program to analyze the impacts of local land use decisions on the transportation system, and a travel demand element which promotes alternatives to the single occupant vehicle. And just a little bit of background on the CMP. It was established back in 1991 by the state, and at that time the legislature used CCTA's growth management program from Measure C as the model for the CMP legislation. And so for that reason, we defer to our growth management program to satisfy several of the requirements of the CMP. We do use the CMP to document our current activities, our policies, our goals, our visions, and our major milestones. We use it for to monitor the congestion around the county of the transportation system and to provide an up-to-date CIP, the Capital Improvement Program. And since the draft was released in July, it went out for comment and review. The CIP has increased by several $100 million, and that's due to the fact that we incorporated the projects that came in as part of the TEP call for projects and the RTP call for projects. So there's a few new projects in there. We also updated our current performance measures, including those that are part of Plan Bay Area, metrics used by our transit providers, the MTSOs from our action plans, and the performance measures used in the I-680 CSMP, the Corridor System Management Plan. And as I mentioned, we also monitor the countywide roadway network for level of service. That is a requirement under the CMP legislation. However, because of SB 743, there's a parallel bill, AB 1098, which is seeking to align the two state requirements so that the CMP is in alignment with whatever the decided upon metric is out of SB 743, which we believe to be VMT. So we will see some changes probably the next cycle of congestion management programs. But we also use the monitoring as an opportunity to not just evaluate congestion for cars, but we also collect bicycle and pedestrian counts at all 65 monitoring intersections. And we release all of that data to all of our local jurisdictions for their use. So under separate cover, we are also required to submit a model consistency report to MTC. We will be doing that shortly. And we did receive confirmation from MTC staff based on our draft CMP that we were consistent with the current RTP as well as with the 5 requirements that I mentioned earlier. So that being said, staff's recommendation tonight is to adopt the 2015 Congestion Management Program under Resolution 15-59-G and forward it to MTC, who will be adopting all the Bay Area CMPs under one decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I do not have any speaker cards yet, so if someone wants to speak on this item, please get them to Denise right away. In the meantime, I will take questions or questions for Matt from the dais. Anybody? I'm not seeing any questions at all, so I will open the... Wait a second. This is a public hearing. I will... one last call, raise your hand. Okay. I will open the public hearing. Anybody want to speak? This is your last chance. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Nobody's rushing the podium. We will close the public comment period and come back to the dais for action.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Romick, second by Tatson. Any further discussion?
Just
yes,
a compliment to staff. This was really easy to read online because you had both strikeout, you had the complete. It pops up so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for anybody who wanted to study this at home, it was really great, really well done. And it was nice to have this with no comments.
Thank you.
All right, with that, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, we're on a roll. 4B8, the status report on the I-680 and the I-80 high-capacity transit investment studies. Martin, you're up again. And again, if there are any speakers on this, please get a speaker card to Denise.
Good evening once again, Martin Engelman, and we're here to present to you the status of two corridor studies that recently were undertaken, and they're primarily undertaken to support the development of a transportation expenditure plan. So there are two studies going on. One is the I-680 and the other is in West County on the I-80 corridor. I-80 is the big study, and I-680 is the little one, at least in terms of scope, schedule, and budget. So tonight we'll give you a very brief status report on the West County study and focus primarily on the I-680 Transit Investment and Congestion Relief Study, which is now completed. So both focused on the specific corridors, looking at existing and future conditions, travel patterns and demands, and then generated transportation investment alternatives, which were tested and evaluated. West County study is about 35% complete. Alternatives are under analysis, including express bus service, bus rapid transit, commuter rail, extension of BART, and each of those alternatives are going to be fully analyzed, and the results will be available later in 2016, with completion of that study expected in the fall of 2016. John Nemeth, the Executive Director of WICTAC, is here in the audience tonight, and he's the project manager for the West County study, so if you have any questions regarding that, I'll defer to John. So turning now to the I-680 study, that's the focus of our discussion tonight. As I said, the study is completed, and we're presenting it to you tonight for your acceptance. I really enjoyed overseeing this study. We had a really good consultant team doing the work and a great consultant manager, Bill Loudon, who's to my right. To oversee the study, we created a policy advisory committee, and that PAC was truly engaged. That's code for we had some very robust discussions about the alternatives considered. The PAC was comprised of members from SWAT, TransPAC, and TVTC. Commissioner Durant served as the TransPAC rep. Commissioner Tatson represented Lafayette. We had SWAT commissioners Dave Hudson and alternate Karen Stepper representing San Ramon and Danville, alternate Candace Anderson from the county, and from TVTC, Tri-Valley, David Hobart from Dublin also served on the PAC. Since the alternative study involved a BART option and connections to BART, we had ex officio member and BART director Gail Murray serving on the PAC. And as many of the options involved Walnut Creek, we had Mayor Bob Simmons, alternate to the ex officio bus transit operator seat on the CTA board. So am I forgetting anybody? Okay. To review the technical aspects of the study, we created a TAC, and that included even more representatives, BART, the cities, the counties, and since we affected I-680 itself, we had a Caltrans rep. We also had Chris Weeks, transportation manager from Bishop Ranch, to serve on the TAC, and they helped us analyze the transit connections. The TAC met regularly in advance of each PAC meeting. The PAC actually met 6 times since June 2015, and last November 30, that Policy Advisory Committee had its final meeting and approved the recommendations of the report, which is in your packet. The executive summary is in your packet, and the full report is a separate web accessible attachment. I want to thank all the PAC and TAC members for making this a truly exciting and rewarding experience. I want to thank CCTA staff, Matt Kelly, our associate transportation planner, was deputy manager for the study. So we'll go to the presentation. I do want to mention that there are now many moving parts to the I-680 corridor, more moving parts than we've ever seen before. We have MTC constructing an express lane project that's out there south of 24. CCTA is working on continuing those express lanes to the north. Caltrans recently completed a corridor system management plan, which was presented to you back in April and included some recommendations, including new auxiliary lanes. And at the same time, we're really looking at the I-680 corridor as an opportunity to implement integration of corridor management, active traffic management techniques, and we want to make this corridor really the most technologically advanced in the Bay region. So to keep track of all that, of all the projects and programs along the corridor, and to cover how all the pieces fit together, we're initiating a corridor management approach. And so CCTA will be assigning a person to that shortly to take that responsibility. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bill Loudon. He's the National Planning Manager for DKS, and he's the project manager for the I-680 study.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for allowing me to make this presentation. It's a real pleasure to be here. This was a very exciting study and created, I think, a very exciting set of recommendations. And I think the innovation in the recommendations, the new technology options and service options was really a tribute to the forward-thinking TAC that we had and the TAC that supported that, but also the forward-thinking staff of CCTA. So I do want to acknowledge the very valuable contributions of our other partners on this, Parsons Transportation Group and Circle Point. They were valuable throughout the process. As I think you know, we were looking at ways to improve both transit service and congestion relief in the 680 corridor. We looked at a corridor that really stretched from the Benicia Martinez Bridge down to State Route 84 in Alameda County. But then within that, we focused quite a bit of attention on the kind of Walnut Creek to Dublin part of it, and you'll see that in the recommendations. We began with an examination of a broad set of options. There were 16 initial options considered, 3 that were bus transit oriented, a variety of rail options, 4 light rail, 2 ultra light rail, and 5 heavy rail options. All of the rail options were again focused in the core area between Walnut Creek and Dublin. And then also a connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle support option, really designed to get the most out of the changes in vehicle technology and CVAV technologies that are coming online. So that's what we started with, 16 options. And we evaluated those with a set of 11 different criteria that included increases in person throughput, attractiveness to users, and enhanced connectivity, but also quite a number of impact areas, including community acceptance, policy consistency, and then finally really quite a bit of focus on capital and operating cost. And we tried very hard to do this as visually as we could, showing everything in a consumer report style ranking in tables that the PAC and the TAC could use to make decisions among these 16 options to narrow it down. And we did that, got down to what we call the top priority options, which included 4 from the original set, an expanded bus transit that really built on the improvements and funding that had gone into the corridor as a result of Measure J, and an automated guideway transit. This was the ultra-light rail option, and an elevated connection between Walnut Creek and Dublin in the 680 median. We looked at a BART option that was tunneled underground for the entire length and connected into the lines at both ends. And then, as I said, a connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle support in using all of the lanes. At the request of the PAC and the discussions, we also added in an active traffic management element. So we really ended up with 5 top priority options that we analyzed in more detail with a lot of focus on what ultimate effect they would have and what would they cost. This table is a little busy, but it shows really the cost differences and the 2 rail options kind of in the middle of this stand out because they have B's next to them in terms of billions rather than M's in terms of millions. And unfortunately, the analysis of those options really indicated they were either just barely at the edge of feasibility for an elevated tram and very low feasibility and cost-wise for BART, which would be in the $6 to $9 billion range. Just to give you a perspective, what we ended up with was a package that was about 1/30 the cost, capital cost for the BART option. That's 1/30, or about 3%, and only about 1/3 of the annual operating cost in the final package. So the decision on the part of the PAC was to move forward with the 3 non-rail options here, the enhanced bus, connected vehicle, automated vehicles, and the active traffic management in a combined package. So we got a recommendation for the PAC for the I-680 Enhanced Transit and Innovative Transportation System Management. And this really is a tremendous collection of innovative service options and technology options. It's multimodal. It provides transit service support in an integrated way with much of what's already there, but also provides congestion relief on 680 through some traffic management and through, again, support of connected and automated vehicle options. This really, I think, is a showcase corridor with all of these elements in the Bay Area and probably California. So it does include the 4 elements that I talked about: enhanced bus transit service, a demand-responsive transit service that is connected, shared autonomous vehicles or driverless vehicles providing on-demand transit service, connected and automated vehicle support on 680, and active traffic management. So the first of these elements is the enhanced transit. It included a key concept, which was additional park and ride. A lot of support for additional park and ride with shuttle service, frequent direct shuttle service to BART in the corridor. But also enhanced local, express, and school bus services. And then a new concept for the Bay Area and really for California, and that's bus on shoulder operations, because of concerns that bus operations in the corridor are very slow if they're using 680. It's difficult to get into the HOV lane. And so that became a part of it. And then smart mobility hubs at the transit lots that really provide more than just a parking place, but a way to connect, and I'll say a little bit more about that. This diagram shows the concept for the park and ride and shuttle to BART. We identified 12 potential locations for park and ride, and then used 4 as examples for costing and ridership analysis, or evenly distributed through the corridor. We costed out the shuttle operation, 10-minute headways during the peak commute periods, and then park and ride would be the centerpiece of smart mobility hubs. The smart mobility hubs would not only provide the parking, but also opportunities for a gathering point for dynamic ride sharing, potentially car share and bike share stations, places where private employer buses and shuttles could operate from. That's already popular in the corridor. And then some possibilities for public-private partnerships with companies like Uber or Lyft to provide that first mile or last mile services. The diagram in the top shows the multiple options for getting to these and then the connections to the BART stations. One of the concerns, as I said, was buses and the time it takes to get on or down the freeway because of the congestion. And the PAC really wanted to examine bus on shoulder. So we did investigation of this, and I wanted to use this video. Let me click on it here. As an example of where it's done before. We found that it was very common in some other operators in Chicago, Illinois, in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area of Minnesota, and in North Carolina in the Research Triangle. This video is from the North Carolina application, and it's a good visual representation of how it works on the freeway and how it uses the shoulders. Now, for 680, we're really fortunate because there's an extensive auxiliary lane, that's lanes between the ramps, that could be used as well as the shoulder here. It shows the bus going onto the shoulder, bypassing the congested traffic. This is, again, good for the shorter use of the freeway when it's too big of an impedance to get all the way over to the HOV lane. This would require a change in California. The California Vehicle Code doesn't allow for bus operations on shoulders now, but Caltrans has an option of having a pilot program, and so this would have to be one of those pilot programs and hopefully prove successful. But the PAC thought it was a good potential application for that. This diagram shows the pattern of either existing auxiliary lanes that could be used, where there are some proposed new ones that came out of the corridor system management plan that Caltrans recently completed. Those are the green ones. And then the gold kind of stands out. Those are the places where the bus shoulders could be used to provide a continuous movement for the buses on either shoulder or auxiliary lanes. The second element was the demand responsive transit service, or the connected shared autonomous vehicles. The package included funding for 12 initial vehicles to test out this service. They would use the smart mobility hubs as docking stations. They'd be all electric vehicles. They'd use advanced sensor communications and control systems to allow them to sort of communicate with the environment and be able to operate in an autonomous way, and could support, again, innovative business models where some of these services might be provided by the private sector. This is a bit of advanced thinking and forward thinking, but the authority is supporting a pilot test of these vehicles and service in Bishop Ranch in the coming months. The third element was the connected and automated vehicle support. Again, this really does depend on penetration of the vehicle fleet with technology that allows for this, but the package includes the roadside investment for vehicle-to-infrastructure communications, fiber optic communication network, high-visibility pavement markings, a higher level of roadway maintenance so that all of the connections occur all the time, and then transit vehicle assistant automation. As illustrated in this next diagram, this could be used to support the bus on shoulder making sure that there's information to the bus whether the shoulder is clear. It could give advance notice to the ramp metering to keep the on-ramp clear if a bus is coming through. It would provide for lane control and management, queue warning or blocked lane warnings, like a sign, either showing on a sign or within the vehicles. All of these leading to fewer collisions and reduced delay and damage and loss from collisions, and that's been taken into account in our travel time analysis. This also has an element for the driver information, which would be part of the active traffic management, or the fourth element, which includes vehicle detection and video surveillance, driver information systems, dynamic lane use management, letting drivers know when a lane is blocked, adaptive ramp metering, and an integrated information management system that would include corridor management and control that Martin was describing. So that's the package. We did do some analysis of mode shift and ridership. We estimated in the range of 2,300 to 2,800 users of the park and ride and shuttle operation. That was about 75% of that was people actually parking, going to BART. The other 25 were either reverse commuters or getting access by other modes to those mobility centers. We also included in the package a roughly doubling of the school bus service in the area, and that would add another 1,600 to 1,800. So the combination is close to 4,000 to 5,000 new riders a day, and that was about half of what we estimated for a BART connection or rail connection in the corridor. So about half of the ridership, but again at about a 30th of the capital cost. We did evaluation of travel times from the whole package. That's included here in the after is implementing the full package of recommended improvements. We did it for a variety of travel patterns. Probably the most interesting is the one in the core between Walnut Creek and Dublin. We estimate with the full package that the drivers, whether they're single occupant or in the HOV or express lanes, would get about a 20% reduction in travel time, and for transit, almost a third of time, 32% reduction. The estimated costs were for between 215 and 230 million. Like I said, that's a fraction of what the rail options were, and the overall cost of about 10-11% annually for operation. Most of that is for the additional transit service in the enhanced transit option. So in summary, I think it's a very exciting package of multimodal improvements for transit service, for freeway management and control that will improve both mobility and travel time and safety. With that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have.
Thank you. That was interesting. Questions, Ron?
Yeah, I noticed on the video, well, I didn't notice on the video any markings or signage for the buses riding on the shoulder. Is that a component on that program?
It certainly would be here, and we did talk about that, a need for signage to alert people to the fact that buses could be using the shoulders. But yeah, in the North Carolina example, it wasn't in the video. I think it was, I believe, in the we also had a Chicago video, but it was a left side lane instead of a right side lane.
Okay, Newell and then Chris.
Actually, is it okay if I really just make comments? I don't really have any questions because I've been involved in this for a while. First of all, I want to thank Martin and all of you that have been involved with this. I think this came out really well. It was a challenge in the beginning. People had a lot of different ideas. But I think lessons learned from what happened to Highway 80 out in West County, where we're now trying to go back to fix a problem that got way out of control, the traffic volumes and things. This is really forward thinking. I think this would be the first area in the county that we have a problem, but we'll get ahead of a problem. We can't pave our way out of this. We spent over $1 billion so Bob could get home to Brentwood because there really wasn't, there was a country road, now there's a freeway system that connects there. This is a type of system that's cost effective. It takes the technology and embraces things that are coming forward. It'll make it safer, which I think is really important because it's the accidents that cause some of our biggest traffic delays. And it is a good economic investment. You can see for the miles of road there, nearly 10.8 mile quarter section for under $250,000 over a long period of time to be able to do this. I think on Highway 24 and even going back as we mature Highway 4 improvements and that area continues to develop, that these lessons here are going to help us in a lot of places. And the reason why I point out, I think we have a bigger challenge still in Highway 80 because the sheer number of volume of cars is greater than probably the sum total of everything we have elsewhere in the county. So this is, I think, going to add probably one of the better qualities of life, and I think one of our most economic investments. And I appreciate all the work, and I support this and recommend that we adopt this.
Very good. Chris?
Yeah, I also appreciate the quality of the report. It's very good. I have both studied and ridden on Bus on Shoulder in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and in the freeway going from Northern Virginia into D.C. And in both cases, they work pretty well. There's an extensive TCRP paper on Bus on Shoulder. It's a little old now, but there's a lot of work about recommendations on the kinds of signage you put in, what rules and regulations there are. But the question I have with the consultant is, the last I heard, there was a pilot in San Diego. Do you know whatever happened to that?
I had heard that also, but I haven't seen any results. We couldn't find any results on that. I'm not even sure it went forward.
Mr. Iwasaki, would you like to fill us in?
Commissioner, I can answer that question. We approved that pilot when I was at Caltrans, but the issue there is they're looking for a guidance system to keep that bus on the pavement, so it doesn't deviate. So that was one of the requirements, and they don't have a guidance system yet. So that's why it hasn't been deployed.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay.
I got a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. I don't know, I'm just a little skeptical of all this. I think that, to me, it sort of smacks of gadgetry and so forth. And, the one thing that's really working well in the Bay Area, now that there's a huge demand for transportation, are the old-fashioned things, the rail and BART and that kind of thing. You ever try to get on a BART car lately? I mean, you can't find it's sardine land. And so what's happening is people are finally recognizing that rail and light rail is really a great way to get around, and it's so great that they've saturated it. And so instead of thinking about digging deep and building the things we really know work, we're talking about, bus on shoulder and connected vehicles and that kind of thing. I think it's trying to avoid, I think a lot of this, in my opinion, is trying to find a cheap way to avoid making the big investments in transportation infrastructure we need to make it all work, So, you guys call this forward thinking. To me, I think it's just, it's just kicking the can down the road and avoiding what we really need to do, and that is build a modern transportation infrastructure.
Thanks, Tom. Candace?
And I'd love to respond to that because, Tom, really what we were looking at first was we've got a gap between Dublin BART and Walnut Creek BART. And currently, it is a parking lot if you've ever been stuck on 680 going northbound in the morning, going southbound in the morning, northbound in the afternoon. And so we looked at how could we do BART, doing that connectivity. How do we get people in the San Ramon Valley? How do we get people all the way up to Martinez quicker to BART? When we looked at just that connecting, we were talking, billions, $6 billion to try and do that, whether it be underground and whether it be through a light rail system. It was something that we recognized, given our constraints, would not happen in our lifetime. And so then we looked at, well, how do we get people to transit? How do we get them to the BART station? And that's really what you will see with these bus on the shoulder, with these autonomous vehicles, with embracing technology. We are finding ways to get people to and from the BART stations. And it's not that, the gadgetry, et cetera, isn't that far-fetched. You've got Bishop Ranch already starting to use autonomous vehicles in the very near future to get around their business park. And we are trying to drive more people to transit by having them have a reliable, constant bus showing up where they need it to show up to get them to the existing transit, and not trying to do something which BART had no political will to do that connection. Cities of San Ramon and Danville really didn't, or particularly, I don't want to speak for San Ramon, I know Danville didn't really want to see the big train coming through. But regardless, this was something that we figured would have an immediate, something we could start immediately, and it also enhanced what we're already doing on the 680 corridor. And I think an element that wasn't highlighted too much was also the recognition that we need to keep things moving, get accidents cleared quicker, have something like has been done on 80 where you have a much, much more responsive reaction to accidents taking place, clearing them. So to me, this is what we need to do, is what works, what do we already have that we can enhance in a cost-effective way.
Okay. Any other comments on this? If not, the requested action is to accept the report. Motion by Tatson, second by Arnerich. Very good report. Thank you. We really appreciate it, and I think even finding this amount of money is not going to be an easy lift, but at least it's something we can envision doing, whereas billions of dollars for a new BART line is probably something that is far beyond our existing reach. So that said, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain. That it carries.
Some abstain.
You're going to abstain, Tom? Yes. Okay. So show Tom Butt as abstaining from that motion. So very good. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is correspondence and communications. You have a letter there from East Bay Regional Park, which was referenced in earlier testimony, as well as a letter from Assemblymember Jim Frazier. A thank you letter. A letter from the FAA, or to the FAA, about some new regulations they have that are very confusing, and they want our money, and I don't think our taxpayers are going to like that very much at all. So maybe Randy can expand upon that when he does his issues. And then we have a letter from MTC talking about the OBAG 2 update and those who still lack compliance with their Complete Streets elements. And so if you want OBAG money in the future, you've got to get them up to date. And otherwise the rest of us will just take it and spend it. So with that, then there are the associated committee reports, and we'll go to chair's comments and reports. I have none. The commissioner comments and reports on activities and meetings. Anything from anybody? Yes, John.
I wanted to thank whoever decorated the rooms, Denise.
It's very festive. Very nice. It's wonderful. Thank you. All right. And Randy, you're up.
Happy holidays, Commissioner. The FAA has tried to reach into the pockets of the 20 self-help counties, it really daylighted with San Francisco because of SFO, and there's a lot of sales tax generated there. And so Lindsay's gotten involved with Keith Dunn at Self-Help Counties Coalition, and we've written a letter now a couple times. And we're trying to get Senators Boxer and Feinstein involved to stop this, because that's really trying to dip in the local agencies' pockets to extract their portion of the sales tax back out. What else? Right? Gary Gallegos has agreed to come next month to talk about the Sandag lawsuit and where it stands. There was the FAST Act was signed by President Obama. It is a 5-year bill. It's a federal surface transportation bill. FAST stands for Fix America Surface Transportation. It's an increase of about 15% for highways, I think about 18% for transit. The thing that I want to talk about and highlight is, one, there's a freight component for the first time, a dedicated freight program for the first time in the history of the United States. There's going to be a strategic plan. There's a primary freight network and a multimodal freight network as well that are going to be identified and agreed upon. There's also an innovation track. So, Commissioner Butt, there's some dollars available to do some of those gadgetry kinds of things that you're noting, including potentially funding different propulsion units for our ferry service to make it more efficient and emit less greenhouse gases as it idles, as it comes into port. So we're excited about those opportunities to leverage the monies that are in that bill. So I chaired the National Freight Advisory Committee. Hopefully they'll have a Freight Advisory Committee a little bit longer, but who knows? They may sunset that. And we are looking at partnering with San Francisco Transportation Authority. They want to get into this innovation. They want to figure out a way of how do they deal with Treasure Island and get people on and off that island or around that island using our technologies. And so we had a meeting with those folks. And that's about it as far as my report's concerned. It's another year, and I want to thank our team for the great work they do, and thank you for the support that you give us. Happy holidays.
I would just add to what Randy said. Amy and I were both in MTC meetings today, and the FAST Act passed by the federal folks will actually result in a little bit of an increase in our OBAG money, which we will have to figure out exactly how to divvy up, but some of it will be returned to source. So that's always good news. And where some of those other investment dollars go, we haven't decided yet. That's on a future agenda, but there will be a little bit of trickle-down money coming out of that to all of our local entities, and that's all the more reason why you have to get your Complete Streets resolutions and elements up to date so that you're eligible to receive those. And since there are 4 of them in Contra Costa County, we're going to be on top of everybody to get them done, so we bring as much money home as we can. With that, you have the calendar in your packet, and you are going to add to that the first Wednesdays for additional meetings. And Denise, maybe you can email out an updated calendar with those dates, just so that people can get those on the calendar. That would be very helpful. And the calendar of upcoming events. And Randy, could you give us an update on where we are on the 160 ramps opening? Because I was confused by this item. I thought they were closer to being done and opened than it indicates on this chart.
What does the chart say?
Well, it says after the May events, it says ribbon cutting for the SR4 SR160 interchange, but it lists it as clear after the May events, and I don't understand why that would be and why it's not in winter and clear out late spring. Okay.
Well, I'm gonna ask Ivan to give the exact date, but it's dependent on weather. So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the current schedule shows sometime late February, but it depends on weather.
Yeah, good evening, Commissioners. Ivan Ramirez, Construction Manager. So it's definitely not May. Right now we're looking either February or March. It depends a lot on rain, excuse me, and also temperature, because the last pass that we have to do for AC is rubberized, and it's dependent on whether it's too cold or not. One of the things we don't want to do is pour it in iffy conditions and then have it to tear it out. That's happened before.
And that's what, 55 degrees or something like that?
Around that range, that's correct.
Yeah.
It's both atmospheric temperature and surface temperature. The primary concern is atmospheric temperature. Excuse me. So, but with that in mind, we're looking either February or March at this point. So
It
it's
won't be
definitely not May.
tomorrow. It won't be tomorrow that we're doing that paving.
Commissioners?
Okay, very good, but that helps. I was wondering because I thought we had said they were basically complete, and it's just waiting on that final lift. Okay,
Promises made, promises kept, under promise and over deliver.
that's right, that's right. But that means we have a target here that we need to be thinking about the publicity for and telling our constituents that they're actually going to be able to get directly onto that highway from all the directions that they need to go instead of having to go 1.5 miles or 2 miles down the freeway and flip around. So that'll be exciting. Okay, very good. With that, unless there's something more for the good of the order, we stand adjourned. Yes, we stand adjourned to our January meeting, and that will be on January 6th at 6:30. So we will see you all then. Happy holidays.